You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at WPKN.org. Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
With this year's legislative session taking place right before an election for governor, there are a lot of promises and proposals. I'm reporter Ally LeMaster, and I'll be updating you on the latest.
After 2 snowstorms in 3 days wreaked all kinds of havoc with school closures, March is living up to its reputation, first with a wintry mist that closed a number of schools again, and now the possibility of spring-like temperatures. I'm Obernauer with a look at how school superintendents make those decisions when the forecast can turn on a dime.
Camden's deputy police chief has had a career most cops would dream of, but now he's facing an investigation that could cost him his job. I'm Nick Sambides with CT Examiner's latest story on policing and police accountability at the local level.
And I'm your host, Brian Scott Smith, and joining me and our reporters is Greg Stroud, editor-in-chief, and our arts editor, Robin Breeding. Welcome to you all. This year, we'll see many of our local legislators looking for re-election, and that includes the race for governor. Many promises are being made as a result to try and persuade voters ahead of November's elections. Our reporter, Ally LeMaster, is in the studio with us to bring us some of the latest from the Capitol. Ally.
So as you said, there's a lot of proposals this year by the governor on a lot of hot button issues such as artificial intelligence, vaccine standards, gun reform, and banning cell phones in classrooms. But it's a short legislative session, which means that, the session is about making adjustments to the budget, which has already been set. So we have until May, and it's not exactly clear what issues lawmakers have time to tackle.
Greg.
So when you're up in the Capitol, what are the hot button stories? What are the legislators talking about? What's the sort of friction between the parties, if you will? What do you think will get passed?
So don't know if it'll get passed, but I know kind of the big push and pull is dealing with education, whether it be through homeschooling regulation, which has been a priority for a lot of lawmakers, or if it's about raising the amount schools get in state funding.
I know one of the things that did come up, Greg, I'll come back to you in a second. One of the things that did come up is that the Democrats and the Republicans came head to head over an emergency session that happened fairly recently. And it was a bill that was pushed through with multiple things, and they felt that it wasn't, the Republicans said they felt it wasn't the right way to be pushing through, these things. How are they getting on? Because generally they get on quite well.
So you kind of see almost like a campaigning, like whenever there's, a press conference about like Democrats do for one thing, then you have Republicans, coming back and being like, well, we think this way is the better way. And, you see like a lot of contention and a lot of partisanship. I think an issue that you see a lot of partisanship in particular is the homeschooling issue, where you have a lot of Republicans, being like, any sort of regulation that's been proposed for homeschooling, they're swiftly saying, we're not for this. We're going to fight this.
Greg.
So, not to minimize the difference between the two parties, certainly in the last, decade, but to some extent, do you think that the parties, the leaders up there in Hartford, they play to their audience, they play to their base? I don't think many Republicans really want their leaders to get along with the Democrats, and I'd say the same with a lot of Democratic voters.
I definitely can agree with that. You definitely see, especially like certain topics, there's an appeal to the Republican base, or voters that might lean Republican to Republicans, and then you have the same thing with Democrats and kind of pushing more either progressive or liberal policies forward.
Nick had a question.
Every town that I cover is seeing an increase in education spending of at least 4%. And it seems to be a never-ending cycle of education costs going up at the local level every year. That must be an enormous driver for everything that's happening in Hartford with education this year. How much do you see the cost as centering up the debate or being part of the debate?
I think it's going to be a huge debate. So recently, there's been a public hearing on Senate Bill 7, which is an effort to raise the education cost sharing formula. And before people get bored, essentially the education cost sharing formula is the formula the state uses to fund poorer districts in the state. So this formula hasn't changed since 2013. And, this comes, as you were saying, that school districts are facing higher costs. So, the governor, hasn't proposed anything for changing this formula, but you have some top Democrats saying this is a priority. And you have a lot of poor school districts who are saying we need this money and we need a lot more money.
Greg?
I think part of what you're seeing is that Connecticut, except for its pension debts and obligations, the economy is kind of buzzing along, and there's a surplus, and there's a lot of progressive Democrats in particular that would like to use that surplus on some of their priorities, and one of the big ones is education, and we're seeing, certainly in Bridgeport, in New London, in some of these cities, they're saying, wait a minute, a good part of our funding, like 60 or 80%, hasn't been increased, and inflation has been ticking along for the last decade. So you kind of see the pressure, and you see at least some hat tipping to some response. And in an election year, don't forget that Democrats depend on those votes from Bridgeport, from New London, from Waterbury, from these towns.
Eric, I believe you had a question.
Ally, I'm just wondering, has anybody asked the question of what is the point of revisiting the educational cost sharing formula if, as I understand, the state is not even contributing, but it's supposed to be contributing under the current formula? Do I have that right?
Eric, I think the point is that the state hasn't fully funded its obligation, but indeed for a town like Bridgeport, the current ECS formula can bring in a couple $100 million to the town. I mean, we're talking huge amounts of funding that a town like Bridgeport absolutely depends on. So with the idea is that the less money a town brings in through its property taxes, and those are what fund everything locally, the more the state tries to contribute in terms of its ECS funding. And so the state hasn't maybe lived up to its obligations or lived up to its promises, but it still provides, a huge amount of money. And even for a town like East Lyme, I think East Lyme is getting over $6 million this year in ECS funding. And that's a fairly wealthy town.
Yeah, and just to add to that, because we need to move on to our next story as well. New Haven, of course, that's got Yale University having to revisit their budget because of a previous agreement with Yale that's now out of the window. So to your point, Eric, yes, I think you'll find that, all of these towns and cities are looking for some extra money. And as Greg was saying, it's been woefully underfunded for a very long time. We need to move on. Ally, thank you ever so much for that update on the Capitol there. Now, we're all hoping we've seen the last of the snowy weather, but it's New England, of course, and you just never know what's coming next. We've had feet of snow, blizzards, and now the temperatures are inching up to almost spring-like figures. It causes headaches for everyone from businesses to school districts and, of course, parents. And our reporter Eric Obernauer joins us remotely now with how school superintendents are dealing with all of this uncertainty. Eric.
Yeah, well, this particularly this later part of the winter has really been a huge headache for school districts and school superintendents. We had the blizzard, of course, about 10 days ago, I guess, at this point. That closed most schools throughout the state for 2 days. And then we had, no pun intended, the perfect storm coming in that Wednesday morning. It was very fast moving. You could understand why superintendents were very wary of closing schools for a third consecutive day. And it just so happened around usually by 5 or so in the morning, that's when they usually need to call for a delayed opening or a cancellation. No snow on the ground. But by 7 a.m., things were very different. And superintendents really took it on the chin from parents who were very upset and angry at them. But as the superintendent in Stanford said, it's very tough to be a meteorologist and a superintendent.
Greg.
So, I think one thing we have is obviously it touches on another issue, which is childcare. And childcare is very expensive. It's hard to get. And parents sort of use the schools as childcare. So when school's out, what do the parents do? But we're also hearing in Fairfield, for example, for the last 10 years, they really haven't had to budget that much for these snowstorms. We haven't had, this is our first big snowstorm really in 10 years. And suddenly they're like, wow, this is getting expensive. With other things, they had been sort of maybe kind of depending on the fact that they didn't have to spend that money on snowstorms. And so now Stamford, Bridgeport, Fairfield, all these towns are struggling.
Eric, talk to us a little bit as well about snow days and why there's been no remote learning as well.
Well, this was after COVID. There was really a debate about the future of remote learning, and pretty much the consensus was that we want kids in school learning, and that snow days, not that we look for them, but it's sort of a right of childhood. So it is now required that all school districts must have put in 180 days of instructional time, and that has to be in-person learning. So there's no law explicitly prohibiting remote learning, but it doesn't count toward the required 180 days. And then if they were to do that, then you get into union contracts and so forth and so on.
Yeah, there's been a lot of reporting, a lot of kids obviously not looking forward to the fact that they've taken a lot of snow days, and that's going to be added onto the school year. Greg, did you have something to add?
It's just, I do think this sort of odd conversation about joyfulness in childhood, and we all did enjoy our snow days off. And frankly, sometimes when school is convened on those days, only a certain number of children show up anyhow. So there's a disruption, and damned if you do and damned if you don't, really, I think.
Just want to add this in. Of course, it was phenomenal snow amounts that came down. We're not used to it as much as maybe some of the older people here in the room who remember the snow, sort of like snowstorms of old. But of course there was a salt issue, and a lot of places have used up their salt, etc. I wonder if some of this, Eric, did you hear if any of this sort of played in? Because it's a safety factor. Obviously they need to use the salt around various places to keep those roads clear. Do you think this maybe played into some of this uncertainty, but also why there was these sort of strange closures?
I think if you're talking about now this week when they closed schools Tuesday, I really truly believe superintendents, they took such a beating, metaphorically, in terms of the criticism and all the chaos, that I think they just wanted to err on the side of caution this time. Because certainly, Greg, you're from Rochester, New York, where you're, what we had Tuesday, that was nothing compared to what certainly they
10 of these a year.
Yeah. Just one other thing, though, Brian, I wanted to add about when you asked about remote learning. The other factor is when you have a big snowstorm, there can be power outages. And if you have some students who don't have internet connection, and some do, that also creates a headache with remote learning. So that's another reason why it's not really a panacea.
I'm just going to give Robin the final question on this before we move on.
Yeah, just quickly, I was just curious, is the crux of the issue that the cost of extending the school calendar like 3 or 4 days? How many days are they going to extend it? And is it the cost that people are up in arms about? What's the problem?
Not from the school district's perspective. Other than the inconvenience. They don't. I believe in Greenwich now they're looking at currently a closing date of about June 24th, and that's assuming we don't get any more snow. You don't like to push it too late into June for all kinds of reasons. Part of it is that at that point the weather is hot, kids just are not as attentive. So, but I don't. To answer your question, Robin, I don't believe that there's a specific cost associated with extending the school year.
We are going to have to leave it there. Eric, thank you for your reporting on that. And we'll all be crossing our fingers that hopefully this is the last of the snow that we see. But hey, who knows? It's snowed in April before, hasn't it? Now, our final story today is about law enforcement. He's awaiting the outcome of an investigation that could get him fired. But for most of his 33-year career for the town of Hamden, Deputy Chief Kevin Samperi has been one of the police department's rising stars. So what's gone wrong? Our reporter, Nick Sambides, joins us in the studio now with the details. Nick.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, one of the things I like about working here is that we FOI for personnel records a lot. And that's so important in cases like this because it helps afford a balanced view of, in this case, an officer's productiveness and value to society. We had written that he had been suspended that he had been involved in an inappropriate relationship. There was a lot of negative press around Chief Samperi, and this latest story got us a chance to show how much he shined as a police officer.
Just to butt in there for our audience, I think we get so used to this sort of language, this reporting language or this government language. FOIA and FOI is a Freedom of Information request. So everyone knows this is a state law that dates back to the 1970s. It's coming out of the Nixon era, and it's one of those those sunshine laws, is what they call them, that allows any citizen to request public documents.
I believe this FOIA that you're going on about, you got his personnel records. That was quite a sort of like a hoard of documentation that you had to go through there.
298 pages, and that's assuming I counted absolutely everyone I looked at. The other thing it brought up is that he had been suspended for 7 days because he got involved. He lied, saying that he was a woman's brother, and she took their joint account in the Hamden Town Employees Credit Union and proceeded to write about $130,000 worth of checks.
Yeah.
Defrauded everybody, defrauded most of that.
It's another police story. So, Greg, comment.
So when you're dealing with a problem in the a police force, when you're dealing with an officer who has an investigation, what ways does a department, what ways does a town have to sort of look into this or control this? Is there I thought there's a police commission. Does every town have a police commission? And what does the police commission do? Like in this case, what is the police commission doing in this case?
In this case, there are a couple of different ways to answer that question. First, generally, police commissioners act as sounding boards for police departments. They're where political oversight can have a handle on what police departments do, because absent them, generally, you have a police chief like a king, or answering to a mayor, or to very individualized situations. The problem in Hamden's police commission is that a lot of the time they're not aware of what's going on in the police department. And so in a lot of the stories that I've done on Semperi, they've been along for the ride that I've been on.
So Ally, you've been dealing with a lot of policing issues, and you've been dealing with police commissions, say, for example, in East Lyme. So how did the police commission function there? And who was on? Was it a sounding board, as Nick said?
That's a great question. I think there are a lot of parallels with how the East Lyme Police Commission ran and how the Hamden one did. I think, they are supposed to act as a sounding board, but, there were a lot of issues with involving East Lyme police. And it seemed like there was a sort of detachment from what the reports, the police commission were getting versus what was going on in the department.
So in this case, I think a lot of the police commissioners in East Lyme were former police officers or had ties to law enforcement. And on the positive side, that meant that people knew what was going on in a very highly technical field. But on the negative side, they were, kind of friends. Is that kind of what you're seeing in Hamden as well, Nick?
In Hamden, you have 2 or 3 Republicans who joined the board within the last couple of years and who have been generally outspoken, critiquing the police or bringing matters to the public. And then you have a whole block of Democratic Party members who, with the exception of the chairman, almost literally say nothing at all.
So this is a funny case. So up in Hartford, you have Democrats that, one of the biggest pieces of legislation they pushed through in an emergency session, was it 5 years ago, was police accountability. But here, say, Hamden, which is kind of a one-party town, Democrats are in control. It's the Republicans, oddly or unexpectedly, who on the local level, at least, are pushing for some kind of accountability.
That's exactly right. I mean, what you see happening in Hamden is that you have the commission could be doing wonderful things to control, if control is the right word, the police department. The problem is they do it all behind closed doors, if they do it at all. So there's no way for the public to see what they're doing. They're not forthcoming. And the chairman of this board, again, a Democrat, has chastised members publicly but implicitly to not speak about what goes on in the police department. And that's a big problem.
So even if they're doing a good job, sometimes it's hard for the public to even know, because they can't get the information. And that's part of the reason why you're filing freedom of information requests.
Exactly right. Yeah, I have to file a lot of them. I filed maybe a dozen, and I'm waiting on one. Is already going to Hartford as in the form of a complaint. The rest are awaiting the town attorney, one person, basically redacting whatever sensitive information should be redacted from hundreds of pages of files. It's just an unwieldy system that doesn't promote accountability except for when we get the documents and then what can we make of them. In this most recent story, we're talking about a case in 2004 that has a huge amount of mysteriousness to it. To me, there's just a lot of things you can't answer, and it can, depending on how you interpret it, you could say that Sampieri got a break that allowed him to keep his career going.
So a 20-year-old scandal that has it ever been reported on?
Never been reported.
So for the first time, and it's simply because you filed a Freedom of Information request.
Yep.
And you got the documents. And this is the case, I think everyone in this room has filed one of these requests, that you have the right in Connecticut to know what public employees are doing. The courts have upheld that. And so there's certain privacy restrictions, but otherwise you can request a file, whether it's of a teacher, a firefighter, a police officer.
And the lack, I could say this too from personal experience, the lack of disclosure on the part of the police chief as to what's going on in the department and the commission has propelled the police and fire department's morales down to what I would wager would be all-time lows. I get more attaboys from police that I happen to bump into, and I really don't see too many of them. Our focus is much more on government than anything else. Attaboys out of the rank and file police, because they are enormously frustrated with what they see as a mirage of fairness. Fairness is what seems to be there on the surface, but they have tons of questions. They don't think there's fairness there at all.
So what we're seeing here for me is police accountability, reporting on the local level, not just policy, but it takes that sort of on the ground reporting to really see what's happening. And it kind of gets beyond the politics, gets beyond the noise.
Right.
And we'll be doing a lot more of this.
Yes, most definitely.
And also something that we need to be watching out for as well. Of course, the Attorney General, William Tong, is looking to possibly not sort of withhold FOIA information, but make it more difficult, for people to get hold. And that obviously will mean the media as well, by sort of like charging for certain FOIA, etc. So there is a big concern about what actually is free information or freedom of information here in the state of Connecticut. And as I say, that goes all the way to the top of the Attorney General there. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. Nick, thanks ever so much for your reporting on that. Time now to take a look at events happening in and around the state with our arts editor, Robin Breeding. Robin, welcome back. And what have you got for us?
Well, first up, I'd like to have an event that isn't really an event, but an act of kindness. And one of the biggest tulip growers in New England is Wicked Tulips Flowers. And that is in both Preston, Connecticut and Kingston, Rhode Island. And they have what's called Tulips for Love and Hope program. And they ask for people to write in what organization or person they think is deserving of a giant bouquet of tulips. And I think that's a very kind thing to do for people. So in April, you can go to the farm and pick tulips.
When it warms up a little bit. Or in March, they can order tulips. They can order the bulbs to plant in the fall. And that's at two of the largest tulip farms in New England. I mean, beautiful tulips. And it's for a good cause.
It is absolutely a great thing. So if you want to nominate, I believe you can nominate people.
Yes.
You can go to the wickedtulips.com website and you can do that. A very worthwhile thing. And also, I believe you can order your tulip bulbs as well there. Take us on to the next one, because this is a fun one.
All right. Next up is Sea Queens at Port of Call and Mystic. And Mystic, for people who don't know Port of Call, they have been doing drag shows for quite some time. And I thought this was fun because it's a St. Patty's Day drag show. It's called Pot of Glam and Lucky Bee Drag. And, according to them, it's serving face, fantasy, and a whole lot of fierce. So, get down there to Port of Call and have some fun for St. Patrick's Day.
It's one of the best bars in it's actually been rated. It's up for one of the best bars in America. it's got, I guess leprechauns and drag queens.
Yeah.
Absolutely. March 15th, Sea Queen's Port of Call and Mystic. That's 15 Water Street, Mystic, Connecticut. What else do you have for us?
So next up it is at the Aldrich Museum, and it's a fusion between an artist and a big art installation that's up there and a poet. And both of these people have Somali backgrounds. One was born in Somalia and the other has a Somali father. And the poet is going to be doing readings of poetry inspired by the installation in the museum. And let me just say, it's Safia Jama is the poet and Uman is the artist. Really great work.
So that's in Ridgefield. I mean, the Aldrich is certainly one of the best, most forward-thinking art galleries in the state. And this looks like the show looks beautiful. And I haven't even gotten as far as the poetry. So I assume the poetry lives up to the visuals.
Yeah, both of these people are big names. So they're both really worth going to see.
Okay, that's March 20th, 5:30 p.m. at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum, 258 Main Street, Ridgefield in Connecticut.
So next is the Schubert Club Awards Competition for Young Musicians. And the reason I put this here is it's a great competition for young adults who are really advanced musically, and they have piano and strings competitions. It's a two-part program where you can go listen to, people from, 8 to 18.
I know, talking to conductors, talking to the people that run the orchestras in Connecticut, that getting young people involved, getting young people to attend is one of the biggest goals, because these are living art forms and they're living until they die. And so this is one more way to do it. You offer young people prizes, you offer them the opportunity to perform, you offer them the opportunity potentially to play with a great orchestra. So the Hartford Symphony Orchestra is a great orchestra. And so it's quite an opportunity that I hope people will come out, cheer people on, and participate.
So that's March 21st, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and also April 26th, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at the Greenwich Arts Council. There is a fee of $35. But yeah, absolutely, that sounds great. Young musicians, there aren't enough of them. So good luck to them. What else have you got?
All right. Friday, March 27th is a rum tasting at the Keeler Tavern Museum up in Ridgefield. And this is a beautiful 1713 house where you can go in, and they're going to have bartender and owner of 1928 Cocktail Club in Branford with their chief curator, Catherine Prescott. And they're going to talk about the history of American rum and have a tasting. And it's a beautiful museum, and I think it would be a fun place to go learn about rum.
So there are two things to do in Ridgefield then. One is this fabulous art show, performance, poetry at the Aldrich. And then we have this sort of cocktail history event. And, it's the time for a tiki drink, a time for the rum drink, to get in touch with your inner tropical island if you're stuck here in Connecticut, and and maybe learn a little bit about history, and certainly the history of the rum trade and the sugar trade is timely. I mean, it's tied into the very fabric, the economy of the Atlantic, and frankly, the slave trade. So we'll see what they have to say, and hopefully it sounds like a good event.
That's Friday, March 27th at 6:30 p.m. Rum tasting at the Keeler Tavern Museum in Ridgefield with Frank Dean. That is all that we have time for this week. As always, Robin, great selections. Thank you ever so much for that. My thanks not only to Robin, of course, but to Greg, Ally, Nick, and Eric. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of ctexaminer.com for more stories and the ones you've just heard, and our events calendar, of course, from Robin for all the latest local happenings. And while you're there, why not subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news? It's just $20 for the entire year. Absolute value package there. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.